And good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. My name is Len Lonzi. I'm the Managing Director of the Preccelerator program by Stubbs Alderton Marklees. We are the only Preccelerator program or accelerator program in the country that I know of that is actually sponsored by a law firm, which Stubbs Alderton Marklees is. We're a full-service law firm. We have a litigation department and transactional. We work with startups, and that's why we have our own accelerator program. We, as part of our program, we do these bi-weekly workshops, usually 2 or 3 a month, with experts in lots of different fields. And today, we have a mentor from our Preccelerator program, a person who's become a good friend of mine, and someone that has a great story to share today that really goes to the core of leadership and understanding yourself and how you deal with situations that are life-changing. So I'm not going to get into too deep of a introduction because Christina can do that herself in a much better fashion as she takes us through her journey and dealing with a category 5 event in her life. And I think right now we're all kind of experiencing something like a category 5. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Christine.
Thank you so much, Len, and thank you for honoring me with your friendship and the invitation here today. And I welcome everybody, and I'm really excited to be here. And you know, I've been thinking about what do I have to share in this conversation that we're all having right now. And you know, having endured back-to-back, 2 weeks apart, record-breaking category 5 hurricanes that tore the roof off my house, left me buried alive in a wind coffin for almost 24 hours, and forced to fend for myself and figure out how to survive for a couple of months on an isolated island in the Caribbean where I was living, has really given me a lot of tools that I've drawn upon to manage the current situation. And I have taken that story into my book, The Resilient Leader, which I will be talking about here and there and sharing some of the stories and some of the lessons learned from that experience, which is what the book is about. And really the whole point here is about resiliency in our businesses and becoming a resilient leader. And believe me, I did not start out that way, right? I made plenty of mistakes in my experience. And, you know, I come from an experience, background of being a lawyer and a business advisor and a serial entrepreneur. I've had 10 businesses on my own and with partners. My last company, we took from 0 to 8 figures in record time and went from 100% equity funded to a $10 million a year company in 4 years. And so, you know, I'm a 100-ton licensed boat captain. I feel pretty capable and competent, and I've been well paid to have all the answers. And so I had this illusion of invulnerability, if you will. And we were watching the storm coming in, and, you know, at any point it could have turned. And at some point around 11 o'clock at night, we're watching the last weather reports, and I'm with a group of friends where we've been shoring up our homes and property all day and for days before that. And one of the, you know, the strongest people, someone who's lived on the island for 35 years and who I would trust my life in his hands, turned to me and said, "I'm scared." And it was a real wake-up call for a minute there, thinking, whoa, you know, I thought I've done everything. I've got the gold standard of protection on my home. I'm well stocked with provisions, and, you know, I'm used to going offshore, so I understand how I might be days from rescue and sustenance, and I had to take care of myself and my crew. And still I went home alone that night. And so when I found myself literally trapped in my shelter and, you know, without a home that was stabilized and not knowing how I was going to be rescued, that was the moment for me, you know, realizing that as a panic starts to come up, I got to do something. And that's really the beginning of what became my book. And just the act of writing, making lists. What are all the things I did right? What were the mistakes that I made? You know, I had a boat in California and my home in the Caribbean. I had things like a VHF radio or a satellite device that I could have emailed and texted anywhere in the world, both of which were on my boat, and which was great if I were offshore in my boat, but of course I wasn't. And so we were left without telecoms, electricity, running water, cooking gas for months. And, you know, those are the kinds of things that are so extreme that you have to figure out, you find out who you are, what you're capable of, and you can learn a lot along the way. And so that's what I was doing every day, was learning and coping and surviving, and, you know, then figuring out how to get what I needed. And it was a very powerful experience because, like a lot of us, I didn't know my own neighbors. You know, Curtis is on a boat, so he's got, you know, the boating community. They're incredibly supportive people, but I was on land, and, you know, I was just a mile or two away from my very close community of friends, and I couldn't get to them. I couldn't contact them. I didn't know who had survived or what the conditions of their homes were and their lives. And so, you know, and nobody was coming for me. I had no rescue plan. I had no communications. I didn't know how I would let my family know that I had survived, and how many days would have to go by in that level of uncertainty for them and for me. And, you know, the story unfolds, and it, you know, it has a happy ending, right? I'm here today to tell it. And, you know, what I found is, as we got into this global pandemic, it's a category 5 situation. And I've been talking about this for, you know, a couple of years now. And I've developed my category 5 leadership programs and this talk, and some of the lessons that I've consolidated that I want to share here today with you all, because I think that we're deep in this category 5 experience, and we need to be able to take some action, but we want it to be mindful action, and we want to have it around something that makes sense. And so I thought it'd be great, and I appreciated Len seeing the same thing. It'd be useful to bring people together to talk about what we're all going through, and what are some of the things that we can do and focus on to make this experience as fruitful and profitable and as easy as we can make it, and make ourselves, you know, into something that can contribute again into the world if we feel like we're slowed down in any way. And, you know, I know a lot of people have been doing this for a few months now, and, you know, I found myself busier than ever. And, you know, I have my practices and my lessons learned so that it hasn't been as painful as it is for some. And so, you know, let's just talk about some of the things that there are to do and what it's like. And so I'm going to share some slides with you, and, you know, forgive me for, oops, I got to do screen share first. Sorry. There we go. Okay.
And just so you know, everybody, if you have a question and would like to ask it, you can either type it in chat and I will read it, or if you want to interrupt Christine at any point, feel free to chime in and ask your question.
Yeah, because this is about us, right? What we are all going through. And I, you know, normally I've done a lot of these workshops at the Preccelerator, and I love to have a conversation. And it's a bummer if I can't see you and talk to you and hear what you're going through. So please, you know, share into these experiences as you're learning about, you know, what I'm sharing in my experiences too. And so, you know, here I was, this is me as you know, serial entrepreneur. I'm an author. This is my second book that we have. My first book was a small business survival guide, The Entrepreneur's Essential Roadmap. And, you know, living in paradise, feeling like I was on top of the world. And, you know, I had it all. And so when something happens that is off the charts, everything changes. And we have a choice about what that change does to us, what it ignites in us, and how we contribute beyond that. And so that was my commitment in those hours when I was trapped, and has always been, in terms of being of service to people and really understanding the entrepreneurial journey, you know. And so what comes up during times like this, you know, is, to me, you know, they always start with why. Simon Sinek did this, right? The movement that he started is that we need to understand why we're here. And that's a question that the category 5 experience invites us to ask again every time. So it's not that you come up with your vision or mission or purpose or whatever language you're using, or your why or your core purpose, your core ideology is how I like to talk about it, but that you review that and see, is it still holding true? Are you still living by that? And so some of the things that happen that we have to evaluate is our vision. What was the vision before the category 5, the global pandemic? And we still have to keep growing in and around that. Resources dry up, audiences, we don't have our network accessible to us in the same way. The market's changing, right? The demands, people are holding on to their monies. Things are, certain things are going to flourish automatically and other things are going to cut way back and be altered indefinitely. And then we got to find ourselves in that spectrum. And
Christine, are you
yeah.
sharing your screen because we cannot see it?
No way. I am.
No way.
Oh no, I've got this beautiful, it says screen share. I did, there you are.
There you go. Now we got it.
I got to start all over.
No.
Just
Yeah.
kidding, I won't do it. Anyway, so we're talking about why we're here and the things. I'm going to, flip through some of these things that we've been talking about. Thanks for that. Yeah, so we have to pivot. We've got to find new direction. And we also have to get our teams involved and engaged, right? And they have to be on board. I mean, one of the things that's been so hard is having everybody scattered into their refuges, their refuges, their shelters, and not being able to have that dialogue, that interaction. And, everything gets online. It's all technology based. And we have to find a way to support ourselves, support each other, and get what we need. And, the category 5 experience can feel like this, being out at sea. And so this is what we want to address today and talk about how to become a resilient leader. And that's what I'm calling category 5 leadership. And so these times that we're in is an opportunity for us to figure out who's prepared. Right? Like I said, I've got survival skills. I was a professional rescuer on mountains and at sea and for businesses. And, I thought I had it all together until the most powerful storm to ever hit the Atlantic Basin came and ripped through my home and destroyed 85% of the housing on my home island. And so that's the times when you get caught going, I thought I was prepared and I wasn't. So there's a lot of things that we can do, and we're not in that dire of a situation in that we have internet mostly, thank God. And, we have a lot of willing people who will, pivot with you, who want to stay engaged. And, that's so those are all resources we can take advantage of. But how have we prepared ourselves and our businesses to weather this global pandemic and every other category 5? I mean, let's face it, a lot of you hopefully have never been in hurricanes, and, we're all in this global pandemic, but some of you may have experienced financial distress, partnership failures, with 10 businesses and helping hundreds of clients on 5 continents. There's very few business challenges that I haven't seen in a lot of category 5 experiences. And it doesn't always look like a natural disaster or a global pandemic. So there's really 6 things that we can do to prepare our businesses and ourselves, right? This is a time for leadership, and we have to be the captains of our ship. We have to have certain things in place, decision-making processes, communication plans. We have to have the ability to manage our team, no matter what we're going through, to make the most of this opportunity. We have to understand ourselves. And it's our job to pay attention to the forecasts, right? Even though I was watching the weather and I was with a group of people, I didn't know anybody else on that island. And it took me a couple months to realize this, that had gone home alone and weathered that first storm alone. And that's not something that exhibits leadership, right? How prepared are you? How prepared is your bank account for anything that can happen? And, we have to dial up our thermostat. I talk about it in terms of how do we turn a challenge into opportunity? It's in direct proportion to our ability to tolerate adversity. So if we're the type of person who's going to crumble when the winds shift, then we got to dial that up, and we have to, and we can learn how to do that, and just becoming more self-aware, which is what's called for in a category 5. And so we also want to maintain a disaster checklist. And really what I mean about that is managing the catastrophe that we have with our teams, and expedition rules we can draw from to understand how to make the most of this situation, and also be aware of the inevitable conflicts that are going to come up. And we have this expression in sailing that's called reefing the main. And the expression is, the axiom is, if you're thinking about reefing the main, it's already too late. So the idea is when big storms are coming, weather is coming, you want to reduce the power of your sails so that you're not overwhelmed by the storm. And that becomes an art form and an expertise that you develop with time and a few perhaps disasters to learn how to reef the main. And that's what we're going to get this opportunity to do in this pandemic and every other category 5 situation. And then finally, we want to tune into channel 16. And 16 is the channel we want to keep it on. It's the rules of the road in boating is you don't leave the dock without having your radio. Switch to channel 16, which is your emergency channel. So your Coast Guard is on it, they're monitoring. If anything happens, you communicate via channel 16 initially to share whatever emergency is happening for you. And it's really important for us as leaders of our enterprise to make sure that we're mindful of what is our emergency plan. And we don't even have to wait, and we shouldn't wait for the emergency to hit before we develop that. So what's your communication style? Do you have the ability to talk about what you think, feel, need, and want? Do the members of your team feel the same way? You know, do we have a plan in place? And so all of these things can be done without a global pandemic looming over our heads, but should be done, especially when there's a category 5 situation. So we are going to talk first about creating a float plan. And we have this expression in boating is, are you keeping her where you want her? And so the float plan is designed to help you know what you're going to encounter along the way. The Coast Guard requires us to file a float plan before we leave the dock. And the float plan is the form that shows our people who have a stake in our success, how well prepared we are, who's on board our teams, what equipment do we need and have, what resources have we gathered, and where are we headed? What obstacles are we going to encounter along the way, and how have we planned for those? What's our destination, and when should we be arriving there? What might be the stops along the way? When do people have to start worrying about us? Right? This is useful because it's a matter of life or death when you're on the water, but business and a failure in business can also feel like life or death. And so we talk about having a float plan. And the backside of this form, just to show you what it looks like, is a flow chart that allows you to go through with the questions that you want to ask yourself about the situation. Is this an emergency? At what stage do I have to call in the Coast Guard? Right? When do we have to call our rescuers, our financiers? When do we have to, you know, God forbid, the other extreme, when are we going out of business? Right? So from anywhere from bringing in more resources, bringing in people, calling out the guard, or ending this enterprise, or pivoting into something else and changing our destination. That's all part of what a resilient leader float plan looks like. And so I've developed this. We talk about this in my book, and this is really your float plan to be able to have an actionable tool that, you know, when you're launching your business or you're launching a new product or service or some stage of business, and it may just be coming out of the pandemic, right? That you have a float plan that you've thought through, that you can share with your team, or that you've developed together, that allows you to track how you're doing, and are you going to get where you want to go? And you can constantly revive and revisit it. So what are the things that you would be able to use as a guidepost to know if your float plan is complete? So we want to talk about, there's 4 things that you will demonstrate through your creation of the float plan. And that is your fundamental knowledge and skills, your organizational management, your high-level technical ability to deliver, right? You don't want to have somebody in charge of the helm who doesn't have the capabilities that you're counting on, because it is life or death for a lot of people involved and it with stake. And then finally, having a commitment to continuous learning. That was the first thing that I did in that moment. It was the only thing I could think of when I realized that I wasn't getting myself out of my situation, that I said to myself, and this is what got me through the almost 24 hours of being trapped there, is I'm going to learn as much as I can from this experience. And I'm going to remember everything I did from the beginning to the end, because you know what? There's always going to be another storm. And 2 weeks later, of course, there was another hurricane, and we will have other Category 5 experiences, you know, beyond this pandemic, and it's still continuing. So we're still in the storm. And what we can do in this timing is commit to learning as much as we can from it and have it influence how we develop our float plans, so that everyone knows that we've thought about it, we have a structure, we have a plan, and you can have enrollment from your team, from your investors, from the customers, people that are counting on you to be successful, and have a stake at it.
Christine,
Yeah.
as you talk about your float plan, what would you equate that to in a business setting? Is that the business plan? Is it a different type of plan, or is it an executive summary of your business plan? How do you compare that?
Well, of course, it is unique and original, right? But listen, I've started businesses with a business plan, and I've started businesses without. I've been with clients who've done both, and it's the tool that is actionable. So I look at it as like closest akin to the one-page strategic business plan that Vern Harnish offers up in his Scaling Up tool, which he's a good friend, and he endorsed the book beautifully and is very supportive of my work. And it's the idea of having a self-contained tool that, you know, business plans tend to get shoved in a drawer and they never looked at again. I've put in, you know, thousands of dollars and run dramatic projections and spreadsheets and all kinds of stuff for businesses, and then we never look at them again, because they don't have a life to them, and they don't have action steps in them. They don't have necessarily markers that we can take a look at a glance and see it. So I wanted to create something that was like what we do in boating and leaving shore, because that's what a journey of is, or a business growth or expansion. So it's an actionable tool, and it should be a living, breathing document that you can review and revisit and has markers in it. And I'm going to show you at the end of this talk how to get your own copy of it, and it's interactive, and you can create one for yourselves using my download.
Excellent, thank you.
Sure. So we have another expression, and it's called one hand on the boat, right? When anybody comes on my boat, I tell them, do not walk around this boat without keeping one hand attached. And how that works for us in business is to make sure that we are staying aware, both situationally and self-aware. So it's our responsibility as resilient leaders to be emotionally intelligent and to do what it takes to have that level of awareness that we need by always having one hand on the boat. Where are we? Where are we stepping? What's coming on the horizon? What are the possible hazards that we stay aware of? And where do we start? So I talk about this in terms of mindset. And in the book, I introduce this idea of a self-concept. And the self-concept is made up of 3 things. We all have them, and we have them about different things. You know, there are people, we can ask ourselves, why do I never seem to vary my weight, or my bank account doesn't adjust? What is the thing that's keeping me within 10% of the thermostat, my self-concept about that thing, about how much I weigh, how much money I have, how successful I am? So we have these ideas, and they come from something. So they come from our self-image, how we see ourselves, our self-ideal, and how we see somebody that we admire the most, and most importantly, our self-esteem. So our self-esteem that was dictated by how we were loved or criticized or rewarded in failures and successes and throughout our childhood. And so we have the ability to become mindful of these things. What is our self-concept about how we navigate a category 5 situation, an inevitable thing I don't control, which is pretty much everything when it comes to business. And so we have the ability to take charge and change the results that we have based on an understanding of our self-concept. So back in the day, Napoleon Hill and Andrew Carnegie, who was the most successful industrialist of his time, richer than Bill Gates, and you know, he and Napoleon Hill studied 1,000 successful people to understand what made them successful. And it was very interesting because everybody would have thought knowledge and skills, right? That's the thing that we spend all our time trying to make sure we've got figured out. We have enough skills to do what we have the knowledge, we'll read a lot of books, do a lot of training. And what they found is those two components only represented 7.5% of what made people successful. So what do you think the other 85% was? Of course, it was attitude. And I usually love to do an exercise where we really look at what makes, God rest his soul, Kobe Bryant a Kobe Bryant, right? He had knowledge and skills to, in spades, but it was his attitude that kept him going and practicing and focused on his goal to be the greatest basketball player ever. And, I think that he pretty much achieved his goal in his lifetime, as cut short as it was. And this is the thing that we all have control over, is our attitude. So what does that look like? People tend to take the results, right? We're in lockdown. We don't have the ability to network with people in person. We don't have a reach of audience that we are looking for. So we look at the results of not being able to reach people, and we let that tell us what we think and how we feel. But with an awareness of this and understanding of our self-concept, that we can adjust and dial up our attitude around this, we have the ability to change our thoughts. And our thoughts that dictate the feelings about how we feel about what's happening around us, and allows us to take action that ultimately leads to success. And so that's how we can keep one hand on the boat, develop that awareness, and have it lead us to success, so that we can't be slowed by something as minor as a global pandemic that sends everybody home and behind masks. It's possible. And so with one hand on the boat, there are ways that we can remind ourselves about how to maintain that throughout. So knowing yourself and applying your strengths and weaknesses to real situations, right? Just like I did in that second hurricane, I knew I wasn't going to spend that one alone. And I ended up camped out with 12 people in a structure that had survived the first storm, so that I wasn't going to be repeating my last mistake. And being able to use your experiences to capitalize on opportunities, right? Not just your own, but those of your team. So we can turn those experiences that others have had into how we help ourselves and our businesses, and let the team be a part of that process as well. And always be aware of your leadership ability and your influence on others. I didn't know as much as I knew in my last round, and I had a team of 160 people that I was leading in the C-suite. And I got my first 360 review from that group of people. It was an eye-opening experience of how little I knew, because all I was focused on was getting the business off the ground, getting all the pieces in place, being able to fund all of our activities, making sure payroll gets made and lease payments get made, and that everything stays afloat. So I'm not thinking about what my actions, my words, my behaviors are impacting others. And so it's really important to stay mindful of those things, especially in a category 5 situation. And I think starting a business is most definitely a category 5. So if you stay mindful that your thoughts, your words, your actions will make a difference and impact others, you can be more successful and you will grow resilient leaders in that process. So the next step, we're talking about managing the catastrophe after the catastrophe. And we draw from expedition rules. This is a world we're living in that we have the choice about. We can make this an empowering experience, and we can create opportunities for ourselves. And I know some of you are doing that, right? Where we've found that what we had as a business model may not be serving, and what we might have to do. You know, I have clients who were sailmakers. They had a sailmaking loft and immediately pivoted to making masks out of their materials and putting their staff to work to do something that was being called for at the time. And so now it seems like second nature, right? Everybody's making masks, but at the time, you know, 4 months ago, very few people were doing it. We didn't have enough. So, you know, recognizing and empowering people to think outside the box. What can your business do to pivot that will create opportunity? And what haven't you thought of yet that will be long lasting? And what has this global pandemic taught you about your business model that we need to learn from? So it's really a whole new world. So what are some of the things that we have to think about for our teams? And what, you know, the buzzword, right? Safety. But it's, you know, if you're out on an expedition, you're offshore, or you're sitting here trying to figure out how to reopen and how can we do that safely, the safety of the team is paramount. And this is something we're going to be thinking about, as Len and I were just talking about, for years to come. We don't know if we're going to get back to what is back to anyway. And so, you know, we've got to have cooperation with the team, and everybody's in heightened states. And so how do we make sure that we get everyone engaged in this and motivated? We've got to create a culture that everybody wants to contribute. Everybody knows they can count on each other. Alison Levine she led the only women's expedition, the first women's expedition, excuse me, to the top of Everest. And she was focused entirely on making sure that everybody was contributing. There's nobody who's holding the weak link. We're not sitting back expecting others to fill. And the best groups that I've seen most functional are the ones where everybody says, gosh, I don't feel like I contributed nearly as much as everybody else. And a successful group and team functioning is one where everybody can say that. And that's the truth of the experience, because everyone is contributing so much. And so we've got to come together as a team.
I got it.
Okay.
Hello.
Somebody joining us?
No, I muted him. That's fine.
Okay. And finally, so we have the ability to be the change we want. And that's what's called for in a category 5 situation. And so let's look at it. What happens in the team dynamic? Right? This is an inevitability. And I saw this happen during the, about a month after the first hurricane, is that we're starting to see some normalcy, just like us. You know, people are becoming a bit complacent. They're getting irritable. In the first couple of months, we didn't see protests. We didn't see, you know, people fighting for their right to not wear a mask or not socially distant. They were paying attention and taking it seriously. That's the forming stage of a new enterprise. And every team, every group will go through these stages. This is Tuckman's model of behavior. And if we are aware of it, then we can do something about it and keep people moving through, so we can get through the 4 stages to become a highly functional, performing team. And so the first stage is the forming stage, where everybody's being polite. Maybe they're not sure of what is the mission. We're all watchful, but, you know, interacting very carefully, and there's some confusion. And then we get to the, we get to the storming stage, And that's when conflict starts to come up. Like it happened for us as things started to calm down, as our basic needs were more secure, I mean, just food and water. And that's when people start getting confrontational. That's where conflict arises. Things get difficult. So we probably saw that in the course of the pandemic, the months that we've had so far. We're seeing the storming stage.
And I would guess that we're still in that stage.
Yeah, it's not over, right? And we, you know, what our job or at the leadership roles, and we can do this at the macro level with our companies, is create conflict resolution practices that everybody can communicate, come together, and build a cohesive unit. And this is where we get to the stage 3, where we're establishing procedures, we're able to give and get feedback, we cope with what's in front of us, and we become a more unified segment that is normalized until finally we can get to stage 4. And that's when we're resourceful and open, and that's when success can happen. And this is a normal cycle, and it happens whether you're in a global pandemic or a category 5 hurricane, or just trying to launch a new product or service. So being aware of that, we're going to go through these stages, and I can see it happen in a 2-day strategic planning session that I do with enterprise. I work with, you know, senior leaders and frontline people all together in a room for a couple of days where we're building out their float plans. And in the course of that time, because we're creating something, I will see these 4 stages unfold. And so you're prepared for that as leaders, you know, when we get to that storming stage, not to let it break us up. That's the classic, you know, band on the touring bands, right? What was that Cameron Crowe movie, right? Almost Famous, where everybody's, you know, in the near-death experience and they all hate each other by the time it's over. You think the band's going to break up. And, you know, they come back together. We have that power. And by staying aware of this as a natural part of forming, we can reach that stage. So what are the things that we want to stay aware of? 4 actions that we can take immediately to be able to manage this catastrophe. And that's creating a positive learning environment for our teams and for ourselves, and maintaining internal accountability that respects the culture that we're creating. This is your opportunity to reevaluate what is the culture that we had pre-pandemic, and how can we create something that's more utopian, really, because everything that happened before, we're not going back to anyway. So let's create something that we really want, and let's figure out how to protect it and create the safe containers so that everyone can bring up the tensions that are arising naturally before they can become corrosive, until we finally...
Could you give a real tangible example of that, creating a safe container, and what that would look like in a business atmosphere?
Yeah, so it's really about having a good communication plan, right? Bringing together, having a meeting structure that brings people together in a consistent way so that we understand what challenges everyone is having, letting people know that this is the place where we are going to communicate how we feel, what we think, what we need, you know, the problems that we're having, the struggles that we're having, and we're here to problem solve. Right? This is about language, and we'll talk about that in a couple minutes, is about how do we create language that can change the culture. So we go from being, you know, invulnerable like I was when I went home alone thinking I got myself all secure here, you know, with these metal boards, concrete screws into the walls, nothing's going to shake my structure, and that certainty, to where we get to vulnerability and curiosity. Those are really important things that we can do. We can also give leaders in our teams more authority so that they have the ability to communicate in that way, and to bring the group to get their groups together if there's enough of a structure, middle managers with frontline people, and challenging the strong performers to come up with big opportunities. And so giving people more independence, more control, and revisiting that on a regular basis. And that's part of your float plan too. to make sure that you're handling conflict resolution. And I'll have groups of people that, they're together breaking apart over something, and everybody wants to take their marbles and go home. And so I bring them all together first, one at a time, to get their commitment to coming on board and resolving, and then bringing them all back together from that new place where everybody still gets to communicate and their feelings are heard or their experiences are respected, but the commitment is solidified. And so it's really going to come down to communication. And that's the thing we're obviously going to talk about next, which is that emergency channel communication, right? Where I talked about this as the language changes culture. And so David Marquette wrote a wonderful book called Leadership as Language. And they were talking about, there was a major submarine incident that they used language and communication to help elevate everyone past the situation where we're all going to die and the conflict ensues, to changing the language and everybody comes through swimmingly. And that's, a big order and for any of us to navigate for our businesses, because people, they can go away, they can start over, they can leave and give up, but we have the ability to keep them engaged with our communication skills. And so one of the things that we talk about is having the, what commonly happens in groups, right? The wisdom of the loud. So when you get people in conflict, you'll always hear from the ones who are extroverts. They are the loudest. And it drowns out the introverts. It keeps people from expressing themselves because, the people who are most comfortable in their communications are going to be the loudest, and everybody else is going to sit back and let that, and we're going to lose the experience of whatever they had to contribute. So one of the suggestions is vote first and then discuss. So when I'm running a group, I'll have we'll do a private poll. So I'll have everybody write down their own views about something and create that as a starting point. And then I will read them without knowing who said what and put that into the group. So we end up getting the wisdom of the collective rather than just the people who are most comfortable speaking up. And it will be wonderful to have the introverts and the quiet people make their contributions, because as we'll talk about in a minute, it's essential. And we're talking about this now in terms of diversity, right? We've got to have diversity of voices. And that comes from all sides, whether it's race, gender, style, everything we need. And companies, it's statistically shown that companies that have the most diversity tend to thrive. And so developing these techniques, rather than listening to just the wisdom of the people who are speaking loudest, but taking a poll of everyone, gives you a starting point to discuss with more inclusiveness and diversity. So we need to talk about communication styles. How to identify who are going to be the loudest, and how do we make sure we're taking care of the people who are quiet? So some of you may have already heard of the DISC system, but I like it because it's easy and it's quick to master, and it's also useful at the same time. So in the DISC structure, which is developed by William Marston back in the 1920s, who also happened to have developed Wonder Woman, this is the 4 basic communication styles. And the dominant style is the person who's forward, he's a problem solver, he's very task driven and dominant, right, by definition in the word. But these are people who want to cut to the chase, right? They don't want to hear about your family or your weekend. They just really want to get to what's the problem, how do we solve it? And you can identify a D as soon as you get them on the phone. Okay, what's going on, right? I don't want to chat. And the I, these are our chatty Cathys, right? These are the people who want to talk about the weekend. They want to have fun. They want to make this a great experience. And you put a room of I's together and nothing will ever get done because everyone's having a great time. but they're social and they're important, right? Because they're going to keep the relationships going, and they're very people oriented, but they're also very outgoing. And then we have the steadiness, the S people. And these are people who are also people oriented, but they're introverted, and they're going to be slow to trust. And they want to see more of the I's dotted and the T's crossed from when you present something to them. And they're not going to be quick to make decisions. You know, Bill Gates is an S. And so being able to understand that these are valuable, important people on your team, because you're going to see we need all of them. We need every type of person to have the most effective communication, decision-making processes, and outcomes, because everybody has a point of view and they're all bringing something to the table. An I might make a quick decision and go with their gut and whatever feels good, but an S is going to be looking under the covers, making, you know, sure that this is all done right, and they feel good about it too. And then there's our compliance officers, right? Our chief C's, and these are the people who are also task driven. They're on point, but they're introverts, so you're not going to hear from them as loudly as you might from a D and an I, but they have a very important part in making sure that we're all in compliance, that they've done the research, that they're making a decision from a solid foundation. And so these are very important people to have all together, because you have a group of C's in the room and nothing will ever get done because there's an inertia to never doing enough research, right? You could be killed by that. And a D just wants to get to the results. They don't care about the story. They'll just go with their guts, and they don't care who they leave in their wake. And when I was running my team of 160 people, I thought of myself as a people person, but in certain tasks and under certain stress, like a global pandemic or the start of a business that is rapidly growing, you can have adaptive behavior. So my my natural ability is maybe it leads with an I, but when I'm under stress, suddenly I'm becoming very task oriented, and I don't care if I haven't thought about what the impact of my words are and who's listening and what repercussions there might be, until, you know, you get a 360 that shows you need to pay attention to this. And so there's a really easy way to figure this all out without having to spend years studying it, and that is really left, right, top, bottom. So our C and S's are the reserves, and the dominant, and the D's and the I's are our outgoing people, and our C's and D's are task oriented, and our S and I's are people oriented. So if you're looking for who are the people oriented reserve types, they're going to have pictures of their family on their desk, and when they have one, and they're going to be able to share stories, and there's a certain warmth to them, and they're also going to be a little more cautious. And a D person we've talked about, the C person is going to be more careful to trust you, and they're not going to make friends as easily, but they're going to be very focused on making sure they've got enough data to make a good decision. And so just understanding this, that we don't communicate the same way with everyone, and if we are, we're missing out on 75% of the population. And that's true whether you're trying to sell somebody or get someone to invest in you. You have to be able to read your audience and be able to communicate with them in a way that they will receive what you have to say. And when we're in a category 5 situation, there is nothing more important than being able to communicate. And that was something I had to learn the hard way, because I couldn't communicate with anyone during that time that I was trapped. And even as I got rescued, over time, it took me a couple weeks to get into communication with people that could help me and, you know, support me and get through the next storms that were coming. So we're down to, what does it take to create business resilience and become the business leader, the resilient leader that you want? And so these are the 5 steps that we've talked about to creating resilient leadership in your business and to weather any storm. And that is the category 5 preparedness checklist, making sure that you've thought of all of these things and that you're ready, because there will be another category 5 storm. And being able to create a float plan for yourselves, and I will give you that tool to do so. And managing or keeping one hand on the boat, that's your responsibility, is always knowing where you are, what's on the horizon, what's coming in, and what are you going to do about it. And managing the catastrophe, after the catastrophe, taking care of your team, making sure you're aware that the conflict is inevitable and what can you do about it and how can you demonstrate the best leadership qualities to manage them and bring the best out in everybody. And that's through channel 16, right? Keep the emergency channel open. So that is the category 5 leadership experience that we've been talking about today. And if you would like to have the download of the float plan and some couple other resilient leader downloads, here is a link that you can get all of that for free.
If you put that into chat, people could click on it.
Okay, so I am going to pause, share, and does that let me go to chat?
You can just go to chat from here.
Oh, wait. Hold on. Where are you? Chat. Why is it under, what's the drop?
I'll do it. I got it.
Oh, okay. Thank goodness you know how to type a URL.
Yeah. Leader book.com/challenge. All right. There you go. I got it off to everybody.
Great. So does anybody have any questions? Are there any questions? Oops.
I do. First of all, Christine, great job. I know that it's sort of interesting to talk about that as a job. It's what you lived, and I know it was extremely hardcore when you went through it. And I found it interesting in terms of what you need to do in preparation for a major occurrence, you know, when everything is broken. So I guess my question is, when you brought up about how you decided to go home alone, even after your friend had said, I'm scared, it's almost like, what are the things that we as leaders need to look at to decide not to wait until everything's blown up, but when to start bailing and changing tack, again, just to go up with my boat things. What are the learnings that we could do there to be more open to change sooner?
That's the overriding lesson that I talk about in my book. And
I'm sure the check will be in the mail. I know.
I expect you all to go order one. Becoming a storm warrior, right? I was deluded that I had it all under control. It was a mindset shift. You know, that's why I talk about one hand on, you know, you're in command. There is no higher authority besides nature. And that might be true even in a global pandemic, or, you know, just a market shift or a pivot that a business has to do. And just, so I was unaware, I was clueless to my own vulnerability, that I can't control everything, that I'd never been through this level of an incident before. And gosh, I need to figure out how to ask for help. And so I talk about that really critically in the book. How do we learn how to ask for help? Because most of us, when it comes down to the stuff is hitting the fan, we can't pick up the phone, right? It weighs a ton. And they talk about this in AA, I think. And it's just, so what worked for me was to start by offering to be of service to others. That was my bridge to being able to get what I needed. So, you know, I had a working vehicle. It was damaged, to be sure, but it was functional. And so I made sure that I was offering to go do water runs and food runs and do whatever I could to track down resources. And in turn, people would help me make sure that it was running, because, you know, the batteries were damaged and electrical was off. And so, you know, I was giving to my community anything I didn't need that I had left over. And, you know, in turn, they would, you know, share food with me, that kinds of stuff. So those are extreme examples, but again, we have to recognize first our vulnerability. And that was the piece David Marquette talks about in our language. When we shift our language to talk about it from a standpoint of vulnerability and curiosity rather than invulnerability, you know, which is me listening to, yeah, I'm scared. I'm like, oh, okay, wow, that's a wake up call. But it didn't cause me to shift my behavior because I was still in that mindset of, I got everything taken care of. In fact, I was prepared and spent that whole day helping others because I didn't know that I needed help myself. And so it really comes down to having one hand on the boat at all times and knowing that we don't control everything. And if there's anything we learned from this pandemic is we control even less.
Excellent, excellent. Are there any other questions for Christine? So not seeing any questions, I will say, and this is the shameless plug that Christine does not have to do, I'll do it for her. She does have a book out. Hold it up, Christine.
Oh.
And if anybody would like to get it, you can get it on Amazon. It's a quick read. It's a didactic read. I learned a lot about you know what's going on today in this pandemic and how her experience translates to what we're going through and how we can be better prepared for it. So with that, thank you very much, Christine, for sharing your thoughts and your experience today. Fred, were you just waving goodbye or did you have a question? No question, okay.
Just waving, thank you.
All right, super, super. I appreciate everybody being on here, and we have our next program is, let's see, I believe August 11th. We have an early stage fundraising program workshop with Brian McMahon from Expert Dojo. So please join us then, and thank you all for being here today. Have a great day.
Thank you so much, Len. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for making this happen, as always.
Thank you, Jonathan.